Today we have some very learned scholars from different parts of the world. The first speaker is Dr. Craig Considine, who is president according to I don't know how good your eyes are, but it says president. I thought it was Donald Trump, but anyway, he is president. We'd rather have you, by the way, Craig. No disrespect to any Republicans, well, I think they'd be glad as well. But just to say that he's a very honest chap. He said to me he isn't actually president, so that's useful. But he is a sociologist at Rice University who's done a lot of excellent work on religious pluralism, on racial and social justice, and on understanding between Christians and Muslims. And so he's going to share with us now for 10 minutes or so his thoughts, and then at the end, of course, any questions or comments would be welcome. Round of applause, please, for Dr. Craig. Come on, guys, I know it's after lunch, a bit more enthusiastic. Dr. Craig. That's better.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you all. It is a pleasure and honor to be here, my first time in Abu Dhabi. I'd like to thank all the organizers for putting on a fantastic and an enriching event. As Shah had mentioned, I've done a bit of research on the life and the legacy of Prophet Muhammad, someone as a Catholic who I have grown to admire not only through my personal scholarship, but also through my interaction with Muslims. What I want to talk about today is a set of documents popularly referred to as the covenants of Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of his time. Throughout the last couple days, we've heard a lot about the Constitution of Medina, a revolutionary, anti-racist document that is for the whole of humanity. The covenants, on the other hand, is something that has come to surface in recent years, largely through the excellent work of a scholar from Canada named John Andrew Morrow. He wrote the book, The Covenants of Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of His Time. For those who may not be familiar with these sets of documents, as I mentioned, they are revolutionary. If you can imagine Muhammad, peace be with him, coming up with these ideas, with this social contract, 1,100 years before the United States even existed. Everything in these covenants can be found in the Constitution of the United States. What Muhammad did, the following. I'll just outline some of the text of the covenants themselves. One thing he said, no churches shall be harmed. If a church falls into repair, it is obligatory upon Muslims to engage with the Christian community to make sure that they have a safe space to worship. What we find in the covenants, and Muhammad stated this beautifully and explicitly, he said, if one community or if one individual is facing a challenge, the entire community is also facing a challenge. So he was teaching that we are mutually dependent upon one another. We are only as good, or we are only as progressive as, let's call it, our weakest link. Other issues that the covenants raised: Christian bishops, Christian monks should be free to practice their faith according to their own conscience. Women were not forced, Christian women were not asked to or forced to convert to Islam. I highly recommend everyone in here checks out these covenants. That is just a quick snapshot. But let me pull back and talk to you in a sociological context. As you can see there, I am a sociologist, not a president. The two terms I want to talk about: one, religious pluralism, and two, the idea of a civic nation. So let me start with religious pluralism. Let me be clear. Religious pluralism must be differentiated from religious tolerance. Two different things. Some of you may be parents in this room. I know a lot of you are. When you tolerate a child, there's something negative about that. There's something standoffish about religious tolerance. People are allowed to live in isolation, or let's call it to each his own. Religious pluralism, on the other hand, is the energetic engagement with religious diversity. The energetic engagement with religious diversity. It's not a concept, it's a process, it's a lifestyle. The covenants embody that beautifully. Religious pluralism is the encounter of commitments between perceived groups that have differences. Another way of looking at it, I tell my students this back in the United States. When you think about the term religious pluralism as a process, I want y'all to leave here with an acronym. I call it DEUCE, like the number 2, but also a peace sign. DEUCE stands for, the D is dialogue. Muhammad, in envisioning this idea of a nation state, of a Muslim state, of the Ummah, he made space for Christians. He was explicit about that. He wanted people to dialogue. Dialogue is the first step at chipping away some of these misperceptions and these stereotypes. Simply breaking bread with people. The lost art of sitting down with people that you may not be familiar with, sharing a meal, sharing a story. Once you've started the conversation, you can start to educate one another. That's when you bring in the books. That's when you bring in the philosophy. This is where you try to synthesize different religious traditions, different nationalities, and different cultures. Once you can educate, truly educate, then you can come to a point of understanding. You can read a book, but that doesn't really mean that you understand that book. You start the conversation, you educate one another, then you can see each other in the spirit of humanity. You can see each other eye to eye. Once you have that understanding, then we can start committing to sacred and shared projects with one another in the religious sphere and in the civic sphere. And the E of DEUCE stands for engagement. That's where we go out, different faith communities, different ethnicities, different cultures, different nationalities, and we do the work of God, of the Almighty, of our Creator in the public sphere. This is a way of life. It's a lifestyle. In the United States, we have this term common sense. The new common sense is religious pluralism. A lot of the divisions that we witness and that we experience is because we simply don't work hard enough to get to know one another. Religious pluralism cannot exist if there is not a civic state. And this is what Muhammad created in the covenants. With a civic state, an individual or community's sense of belonging is not predicated on race. It is not predicated on ethnicity. It is not predicated on religious beliefs. A civic nation is rooted in this idea that we are all protected by the rule of law. Muhammad treated everyone equally, and he made space for them in the Ummah. Christians are part of the Ummah. So the civic nation, it is the responsibility of the government to enact these laws, to enact the justice. If you have that, religious pluralism can flourish. I'd like to leave, let me see how much time I have. I'd like to leave y'all with 2 other key concepts that you can leave with. This idea of the clash of civilizations is something that I know a lot of you are familiar with. This idea that there's a Muslim world out there and there's a Western world out there and multiple worlds. This idea that these civilizations and these nations are in conflict with one another is simply inaccurate. When we talk about the history of Europe, when we talk about the history of America, neither historical account would be complete if you also didn't include the contributions that Muslims made. So we have to recognize that nuance, recognize that civilizations are built in time over history and that we complement one another. So remember to be in dialogue. That's what we're doing here. That's the beauty of this event. The whole world is represented here. And the last thing I want to leave you with is from the Pope, Pope Francis, who has been an ally of Muslims around the world. He refers to something that is similar to deuce. It's the culture of encounter. The culture of encounter. How can we learn if we don't meet one another? It's quite simple. I was talking with Reverend Patrick McInerney from Australia over lunch. And we said, both of us are Catholic, and we said the most important educational tool is human interaction, human experiences. That's where the real learning occurs. That's when the sociological theory or the philosophy makes sense, because you have proof, human interaction and life experiences to back it up. So I would leave you with the message of peace. Peace be with each and every one of you. Thank you.